I was, scared to speak up to the level that I do today. And I get in conversations with CEOs from companies that are in their billions and able to speak to them with confidence. And as the CEO and co-founder myself, I'm doing that now every single day. So I feel like if I had maybe not just Oxford Talks, maybe also the work that I'd been done before that, but I definitely think Oxford Talks helped me give a level. Yeah, I think it gave me a level of, okay, it's okay to have a personal brand, and maybe some people might actually watch your talks.
Shiv, welcome to the Oxford Talks pod. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. How are you, Waleed?
Not too bad at all. Shiv, for the folks who don't know what you do, what do you do?
So I do many things, but most of the time I'm the co-founder of a content marketing agency called Shaded, the studio. And I also am the co-founder of a Coachella-themed conference called Dreamland. And we also have kick-off events like Fortnum and Mason afternoon teas and intimate dinners. So
Amazing stuff. Shaded the studio. Tell me about the name. What does that mean?
So shaded by name, shaded by nature. Cassie, my co-founder, and myself, we're both mixed race women, and we wanted to bring in that kind of cultural heritage and that cultural influence into everything we do, because we find that it's a real advantage having not just our own perspectives but also others into the fold.
Oh, amazing. And how does that kind of reflects into the work you do? It's like, do you explain to people that, giving that kind of a diversity and like creativity and all of that? Or this is someone, if someone asks, they tell you them all of this?
Yeah, I mean, often it's up for interpretation. So we really do a lot of work in the D2C space. So often we say that we're shading in the grey area between D2C, so direct to consumer, most of the time because they find it so confusing and so many different elements. And we try to simplify those and give the content that matters.
Coachella Team Conference.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So my co-founders, we've collabed with two other agencies, shout out Studio Hawk and Trendy Grandad, and our co-founders essentially got in a room together and thought we were tired of going to quite corporate style conferences, big stuffy suits, thinking like you're about to go on The Apprentice. And wanted a community really of brands and retailers that feel a bit more fun and engaging. So we have a DJ, we've got candy floss, we've got popcorn, we've got pancakes, but we also have really engaging talks and insights in between those. So we try and do a bit of both.
And if you be honest with me, do people focus most on the candy side of things, or they are more listening to what's being said on the stage?
We always do it in the breaks. So for that very reason, we've got a breakout room. So if anyone wants to chat and anyone wants to communicate, they can absolutely do so. But we have brands like the Inky List, JD Sports, Heights, all join us on stage with us. So it's a real way of getting those insights, but doing it in a digestible way that feels a bit more fun, just like today, a bit more casual.
Amazing. How does the kind of I hate the word synergy. I use it. I get on LinkedIn all the time, or I'm not going to use it. But what is the work that you do at Shaded the Studio, and how does that kind of sort of weave into Dreamland? What is the sort of combination there?
Yeah, Shaded is all about storytelling. So our entire thing is that most people are the main character of their own brand, but they don't really know how to show it. So in a movie, you'd have the main character, who are your heroes, who are your villains, and the storyline. And most brands, I don't really think that way. So they think quite binary. Here is my product, I want to sell it. And Dreamland's the exact same. So it's all about creating a storyline. It's creating a lineup. It's creating the highs and lows of business. So there's real synergy around that, because often we find a lot of the stories that brands tell us when we're working with them in Shaded, and it's really helpful for other brands to hear that.
Yeah. How does one get around to storytelling for specific brands? And by that I mean that, for me, most of my life I had known is just Oxford Talks, because I was very young when I started and everything. And it's sometimes easy as well because it's just the only thing you're working on. But at any given day, you might be dealing with another client in the morning, and 2 hours later is another one, and they would all be requiring your strategic input because in their head they are the only ones you're working with. How do you kind of, I want to say time management, but how do you do the creative management that they're all getting the best of you, but at the same time you get to sort of keep those boundaries in between those brands as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about working with my co-founder Cassie, we've both had 10 years brand side experience. So 10 years of our life was spent in the brand. I was the more technical side of things, working on PPC and paid media and website and all of the technical P&Ls, numbers-based work, whereas Cassie was always the creative genius. So she scaled brands like Coco and Eve from 0 to 12 million in 18 months and did that creatively. So we've kind of grown up brand side mostly, and agency side is only really something we've been doing the last few years. And I think that element really helps because we know what the brands need, we know what the brands want. There's not a scenario that we see at Shaded that we haven't seen ourselves when we were working brand side. So I think having that view really helps us determine what their priorities are, what their strategies could be, and also just generally help them in a way that helps with, yes, we work on an hourly studio rate just like most agencies do, but we do it in a way that we try and get the best out of them and the best things first. So the quick wins, the things that we know, the lowest hanging fruit, the things that we know work really well, we try and get those established and the foundations ready before we start things like trend-based content, because often brands aren't doing the basics well enough for us to then explore kind of expanding onto that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And walk me through the journey of, let's say, let's take our example. Let's say Oxford Talks walks and wants to work with Shady the studio. What journey that sort of looks like? Like, what's the day one looks like, and what 6 months is gonna look like?
It's really simple. So we start everything with the Brandstorm. So it's a brainstorm for your brand, and
I love the
it's
names, by the way.
thank you. We try. And that process really establishes us within the brand. It's a 30-day intensive deep dive into everything they do, from their website, their emails, their content around all of the things that they've done on the website, and then also learning the pieces of storytelling that aren't being said. So there's so much richness in brands that is only kept to the product floor, and we like to bring that out. So often when we're talking to brands and we're brainstorming with them, we learn all of these wonderful things that aren't portrayed anywhere. So we really get to tap into what they're doing. Then the next stage, after we've done that full end-to-end review, we do a competitor analysis, because we don't like to steal, but we do like to take inspiration. And once we've kind of given that inspiration from the content and competitor analysis, we then create a plan. So that plan, depending on whether they're working with us just on ads or just on website content or one-off shoots or anything that we could be working with them on the content basis for, we then create like a holistic view on what those next steps would be. So if it's a photo shoot, we work on briefs. If it's ads, we create a paid media content strategy that goes through all of the ads in the funnel. So it really does depend. Everything that we do is relatively bespoke, but we've been able to make everything quite process-based by having that 30-day intensive learning period. It also circumnavigates some of the struggles that creative agencies find, because often they're spending 6 to 12 months figuring out what the brand likes and dislikes, whereas we find all of that out in the first 30 days.
Amazing. And can I ask, how does it work when, let's say, the brand has onboarded, but at the same time you might have come up with a strategy for that? Let's say it's just a month you spend on it, and then nowadays, especially, we're realizing the whims of algorithms are always there. You might have made one strategy and you see like, oh, the results are not there, which had been there historically. How do you pick up on those? And because they don't announce these things, and it's a kind of like almost a ghost who's operating behind, and then suddenly 3 months down the line they'll tell you, oh yes, we made that change. So but for brands, and they need to be on pulse all the time. how do you kind of manage the sort of longevity of a strategy, but at the same time the instantness of it, like it needs to work tomorrow for something?
Yeah, I think there's a practical reality that brands need to understand, actually, that we break down in short, medium, and long term goals. So often brands are thinking very short term. So they're thinking about paid ads generating sales on day one. Whereas actually the best brands that we've seen have maybe 2 or 3 short to medium term tactics, but one ongoing long term tactic in their mix. So I think navigating that is really important, because it's really easy. There's so many companies out there screaming on the internet that they're going to make you millions in 20 minutes, when the actual fact is the longevity of the brand is just as important as the day one sales. So you could do a 60% off discount and you'll get hundreds of sales, if not thousands, but who are those people buying at that rate? Will they purchase again and expect that type of discount? So I think being agile with the strategies that we recommend, and I can tell you so many countless brands of all the different scenarios that we see, from out of stocks to QVC based brands with really old audiences to retail first brands that have never done D2C. So we see all of these different kind of types of brands, but they've normally got a formula to them. So I think getting the foundation into a good place, so getting the right flows on email marketing, so making sure that when you've signed up to an email, you're getting a good welcome flow, like a 20% off your first order with this really great storytelling piece from a founder or a team or the product journey. So I think getting the foundations in space, it transcends all trends and all algorithms. And then when they've kind of got into a place where they've got a cadence of sending out consistently an email a week and consistently posting on social media, ideally 3 times a day on TikTok, but once is good enough, or even once every few days. But as long as they keep that up, I think is really important. I think we need to stop putting pressure on brands to be perfect too and have everything sorted, because there's not a brand that I've ever worked with that have got everything in the best possible way. Everyone's got places for improvement.
You got to settle a debate for me. How many times shall one post on social media then?
I mean, by the time this goes out, it may have changed, because like you said, algorithms change all the time, but there's quite, depending on the platform. So TikTok is a content rich platform. They tend to want you to post 3 to 5 times a day.
And it can be like just one big piece shortened up, or
Yeah.
new things 5 times a day.
Yeah, you can, repurposing content is something that we don't talk about enough, and you can absolutely repost things that you've posted before, because brands get very siloed with thinking that they've spoken about something once and their people will kind of get bored of it, when in actual fact repetition on the platforms is just as important as posting. So yeah, repurposing content, reusing some of the same hooks or doubling down on the things that are working is really important, but doing new things and test and learning is also equally as valid as important. So yes, 3 times a day might be best practice, but I don't know many brands that can do that. So I know that.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought that, I just feel like that's the practice, that the bigger the brand, that is the first deployment that they would do, like just keep on doing that. But you're saying that is not the case then?
I think it's really hard. I think that there's a lot of need for content, and it's often now going to quantity, not quality, whereas we try and push a bit of both. Like, I think having a bit more of a balance is needed, because you can end up posting things that aren't brand safe or aren't on brand. Not everyone can be a Duolingo or a Ryanair.
Yes.
So I think that balancing those two things is important, but I do think brands struggle to even post once a day on channels like TikTok, because they're just doing so many other things.
What is a brand in your world? How do you specify a small business just starting out? I don't know, like a bakery which is on a popular road, versus a brand, what one would say.
Yeah, I mean, we specialise in consumer goods typically. So we specialise in direct to consumer, which essentially means you're selling a product online in some shape or form. We
And it
most
can be any product, or it's more like sort of
any product,
okay.
anything from a £10 shampoo through to a £10,000 bag. They're all considered brands. So anything from Naughty Hair Care, where me and my co-founder first met, that sold shampoo to curly hair products.
Amazing.
Anything from that to Hermes bags and Birkins. They're all kind of consumer brands. So that's more my arena. And I think, when to your point earlier around when they're starting, I think it depends on the market. I think brands in the UK, for instance, might be looking at a small brand, might be someone doing just under 1 million online, whereas a small brand in America might be 10 million. So, so I think that there's a cultural nuance to that. But as a general rule, we see SMEs be anywhere under 5 million, and then 5 million to 20 million is like the mid-market, and then 20 million plus, especially in the UK, there's less brands doing that. But we've worked with brands like that.
Shiv, I came across this notion when I visit America and speak to sort of kind of American brands. They have this thing there of like, I don't know what would be the kind of term from it, but the way I feel like they're very much of the opinion that if it works in one kind of city, they wanna, for them the immediate next thing is it's a statewide brand, and they really take a huge pride in that. And immediately, if they have like 10, 15 sort of stores in the state, they immediately go, okay, we're gonna go this course. So they tackle brand as this kind of a geographical strategy, where in the UK I don't think so. Maybe I haven't come across those conversations that we don't think state-wise here. We don't think that most brands, I think if anything, they're like, let's just go to London. London is the state, and no one thinks that we are successful in London. Let's go to the quote unquote other state of Scotland, and let's open up in Glasgow or in Edinburgh. Does that kind of sort of gels into like how you work across, both sides of continent now? Have you seen sort of that dichotomy, and how do you see that the brands can be a bit more coherent? In America, it might be a bit more difficult, but whereas in UK, they all kind of sort of congregate into this big lovely city of London.
Yeah, I think UK is very London centric and has been. I'm a born and bred Londoner, so I would probably say that. But I do see that pattern. I do think that people see this big city and see it as the home of places. And for fashion in particular, it is one of the core cities of the world. But I do think that there's some amazing brands coming out. So a brand that we work with, Clomana, for example, she's doing wonderful things on TikTok. And she's come from up north, and she's got a really strong heritage within that community. She's just started a store in Manchester. There are also some brands that we work with that have other northern roots. So El Sarar I used to work with, and they're very much based in Liverpool. Their founder's very Liverpudlian. And Skinnition is a great leading Irish brand we work with, and they're very much heavily, deeply rooted in their Irish roots. So I think there is a place for having a non-London centric approach within building brands in the UK. But I think that it comes down to sheer size, really, because you can be a UK-based brand and have the same creatives all across the UK and be kind of relatively okay, whereas you try and sell something from an LA audience to someone in Texas, you might struggle. Just even from like a messaging, what they resonate to, what type of, if we look at makeup, for example, how heavy the makeup needs to be for that to resonate, like all of those nuances come in.
Vary state by state?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, yeah. You can definitely see trends.
Is there a way to like map it, or I'm sure consumers brand must have done that, like where they're okay, oh, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of people think what we're doing is new in digital marketing, but it harpers back to TV time. So, you could buy a particular audience and send a TV ad to that particular audience in that particular state or that age group or demographic, male, female. I know when my boyfriend's watching sports, he gets a lot different ads to what I get watching Drag Race.
What sport he watches?
Oh, he watches all of them. So
Because I know with cricket, they always are promoting some like cars, like Kia. So the Oval, we are next to Oval. Kia's, I think, sponsored the whole stadium. It's called Kia Oval Stadium,
yeah,
like literally. And I'm like, oh wow. So it's a very nice car actually, and all of those things. But when you go to, let's say, football, and American football is a completely different branding, and UK football. And I'm like, oh, I feel like football carries different sports carry more diversity within them, and some sports are very much like I don't know. I'm speaking I feel like so top level thing. I think nuances might be there.
yeah. I mean, we work with a brand called The Art of Football, and they are an incredible football-based brand. They've worked with the greats, so think Thierry Henry. Anyone who watches football will know the type of brand partnerships. They're currently doing a partnership with Guinness. It's really interesting because my co-founder actually dragged us to the Euros last year
Oh wow.
to watch an England match, and I said the only way that we're paying for this on the company is if we get a football team or a football-based company
Fair enough.
as a part of our client base, and then we can put it through the company. And she agreed because her goal was always to go to the Euros. And we did. A year ahead, we've now working with The Art of Football, an incredible brand that's fast growing. Really, I think it's really interesting because, like you mentioned, sports was never really something that I felt was quite exclusive. It didn't feel inclusive to me growing up because I wasn't very sporty. Whereas now, because it's forced in my household and it's forced
You were
when
just exposed
I'm
to it.
exposed to it. So this year, for example, I'm doing the fantasy football team, and I'm actually in the top 200 in the country.
Is that a humble brag?
Yeah, humble brag. Mostly because my pattern recognition and my data senses are really strong. So the numbers
Amazing.
bit, I was really excited for.
Who's on your team?
Well, it really does depend. I'm currently wild carding. I can go into this. I've learned I now know the full Chelsea lineup, which is my team. Wow. But that's probably going to change before this goes out too, because they change all the time. But yeah, so I think having that background and learning about the sport has really made it easier for me to then create strategies for a sports brand. But sports brands in themselves are so distinct to what their strategies are. It needs very kind of club-based mentality. So you talk about regional club sports marketing is perfect for that because they really care about regional marketing. If you look at America, for example, I would like to say that I'm a Chiefs fan, but unfortunately I'm a New York Giants fan. And I would say that, like, when you go to New York, there is that real feeling of, are you a Giants fan or are you not? And they, have loads of debates, and there's that cultural nuance. So if you try and sell like a Giants t-shirt or memorabilia to somewhere in Kansas where they're winning in the Chiefs, actually, it's not in Kansas City. Yeah, it won't go that well. So I think there's, particularly for sports marketing, but wider in general marketing, I think regional nuance and regional awareness is really key to any marketing strategy. But I think that it's definitely emerging and it's becoming really important as we start to see that there's just so many brands out there and needing a lot more cut through. So if you can double down on an area or a market, it does tend to help.
So what role does emotions and storytelling play in all of this?
Sports is a great example of emotion. I think that if you don't have a story, you don't have a way to root for you. So if my boyfriend tells me about a sports star and his girlfriend's journey of, I don't know, they've had children, he's a great husband, I'm far more likely to want him to win than someone else. But similarly, if I'm looking for 10 hyaluronic acids and they're the same percentage and they look very similar in the marketing, I will go for the one like Colette from the Inkiness, who I absolutely love. I train their in-house team. I know their team really well. It's a £100 million brand, but I'll still probably pick that one up because I've got that emotional connection to them. And also I know all of their stories because I've worked with them. I know exactly why they've done the things that they do. I know that their recipe builder, how much time and energy and effort goes into that.
And
I
can
will
it all be
pick.
just created?
Yeah, 100%. Like Skinnition, for example, is a brand that we're working with, and they've also got similar skincare products, and it's very high end. It's very different to the Inky list, but we're trying to kind of translate some of that storytelling over to them because actually they've got phenomenal products, but they're not necessarily telling the stories of why they created that product, who the founder is. It's Ireland's biggest skincare brand. That type of messaging doesn't come across, and therefore people don't tend to resonate with it, whereas now they're starting to, because we're starting to tell the wonderful stories that they always had and always talk about in-house, but trying to put that more on a global stage.
That's amazing. And when you work with brands, what tends to sort of be the biggest success story where you work with the founders? Like, even let's say it's a medium to large scale brand, let's say 100 million revenue. I think that's a very big brand. But then you work with the marketing team. Does that yield different results versus you working with the founding teams?
I think that it's all about the stage of the company and their life cycle. Like someone like Colette doesn't have the time, or a founder of these big companies doesn't have the time to be in the detail, nor should they be. They
Yeah.
should be the face of the business. So I think we work with a lot of founder brands. So we've helped at least 5 brands go from 200K to 2 million, including the one that me and Cassie met at Naughty in the first year. And the way that we've been able to do that is, yes, the founder story is a core element of that. And brands who are tapping into that founder story, think a brand like Nadea that we've worked with, Delilah, with Rupert, who's an amazing makeup artist who's created a brand speaking more on his story, has really helped his growth. Luna Daly, Katie from Luna Daly, one of our clients, has really been tapping into her founder story, and she's phenomenal as a leader. So I think the founder story is a real core play. I think as we move into the world of AI, dare I
Yes.
say it, I know it's a
Yes.
buzzword, but I think people are craving real stories, and people are craving the why, and they want to relate to someone. They want to see someone that has similar value sets to them or similar reasons for purchase. So whether it's sustainability or whether it's ingredients or whether it's science backed or any of those key talking points, I think people want to know now more than ever. And we're more educated than we've ever been as a consumer too.
Yeah.
So I think that there's ways to grow without tapping in too much to the founder. But if you do have a strong, compelling founder story like Morley Rituals, Anita has a phenomenal, beautiful founder story. We're helping tap into that a lot more, and it's doing really well. So I think if you do have that story, I think it would be really helpful and beneficial to your brand to bring that out.
I always thought that I when I read about the Apple and Steve Jobs story, and I read the part where he went to Regis McKenna, who was the kind of like the Silicon Valley brand strategist and all of that. And so he went to him. He used to do advertising for Intel, and Intel was really great at in the 70s and 80s. And one of the things he said, and that's kind of stuck with me forever in life, that a lot, even if you see, like, I can name a lot of Fortune 500 companies, but you just never heard of their CEOs or whatever. For example, if I can ask you who might be, I think after this there's no more sponsorship for them. Like, who's the founder of Heinz or the CEO of Heinz ketchup? But the product. I mean, and the marketing they do. Even recently, I think they came out with I think they might have rewatched the Don Draper's episode of like, pass me the ketchup, or where's the ketchup. So that was really amazing, and you see that, and I think people want to see that kind of advertising as well. Like, it's so cool, and it makes you sort of have more connection with the brand. But then there's no people part into that, which I always sort of struggle with this. Like, how do you decide that I want to put more people into a brand? Because it's ketchup at the end of the day. Like, am I gonna be like the CEO who's like, this is the ketchup, and I manifest it, and this is how we recipe the ketchup? Of course you might feel a bit itchy, like, oh, this is not really I want to go. But at the same time, it's a huge global brand. in your opinion, when what are the frameworks that someone needs to go through and decide, like, put the founder brand in or don't put it in actually?
I think instead of putting the founder story in and not putting it in, I think it's on a spectrum. So
Hmm.
I think it's more, where do you put the founder story in? So if it's a beauty brand and your founder really aligns, like Michelle from Bouclem, one of our clients, again, she's got curly hair, she owns a curly hair brand. Go on
Wow.
camera and shout about that everywhere you can, because people see her and correlate the product really closely. Whereas there are some brands that don't have founders that are as aligned
Do
with
they
the
tend to
brand
be more
story.
successful?
I think success is all about, I think success is a mixture of how good your product is and how well you're communicating how good your product is,
Yes.
and then how many people are willing to buy that product. I think that's an indicator of success. I think, like you mentioned, it might not be appropriate for us to start talking about founders of companies that are maybe heritage brands that don't have that kind of ability to tap into that kind of emotional story of why they've created a ketchup brand, for
Yeah.
example. But I think there's still a time and place, especially for the emerging brands, to understand why you've done it, especially when, for the more emerging marketing techniques, I think they're the ones that need to cut through a lot more. Whereas the heritage brands, we're potentially working with a few heritage brands and big names. And I think they're the ones that have these really compelling stories of what they do. So they've got charities that they've worked with. They've got team members that they've supported and grown up the
Yeah.
ranks. Like there's that viral LinkedIn post on Pret a Manger where they started on the shop floor and now are the CEO. That's a story within itself.
Wow.
So I think that to answer your point, I don't think there's a cookie cutter way of storytelling. I think that's why we do some level of bespoke, and probably always will, to strategies, because whilst two curly hair brands that we've worked with, Naughty Hair Care and Bouclem, both of them demand very different strategies. Things work for one of them that won't work for another, despite, if you detailing them on a piece of paper, what their core kind of audiences are and USPs, they might be seen as quite similar.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard. I don't want to cop out and
No,
say that,
absolutely.
I don't know the answer, but you don't know what you don't know. And I think the best thing you can do is test.
Shiva, I want you to settle confusion for me. I heard this somewhere. I think it might be Seth Godin. I'm not sure exactly. I met him actually at TED conference, and he pointed me to some of his books. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe I read it there, but I heard this notion that we know Marriott as a brand, and we know Nike as a brand, or Nike if you're in UK. If Nike decides to go and make a hotel, we would roughly have an idea of what that would look like, because it's such a strong brand. We know what they stand for. But the other way around, we would not know. If Marriott decides they want to start with a sneaker brand, I would have no idea what they would come up with. How is that? They're both bazillion dollar big companies, and there's no shortage of money to put behind stories. And I don't think so. They Marriott is a very strong brand in itself as well. They promote a lot, and they are, you go there and it's you can expect a certain quality from them. But why is it that one notion exists for one and not the other way around?
I think that a lot of athleisure brands like the Nikes of the world have done an incredible job with associating themselves in wider contexts. So the reason why Marriott might not be, in comparison to Nike, be able to translate the same types of things if they're doing the same things. So say Marriott starts a shoewear brand, Nike starts a hotel. I think the reason why they might have different levels of success, and we don't know until they try it, but potentially would be, it's just association. We can expect a certain level of kind of awareness. We know what the color schemes potentially could be like. We know the logos. We have that view in our head already of Nike, whereas with brands like the Marriott or other brands in that can't necessarily translate cross category as successfully, they've really just established themselves within their core product range, which for them is hotels. So I think they can have just as much success doubling down on the hotel
Yeah.
industry as you know, Nike would be in the athleisure center. But I think that Red Bull is a great example. Like, who thought Red Bull would
Yes.
ever do racing? And they're
Yeah,
one
and a
of the
very good
best
one.
teams.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I'm a Hamilton fan, so that's a bit of a
That's
sensitive subject.
I
But
share my birthday with Lewis, so I'm always a Lewis fan.
well, I think that's the great best answer. But yeah, so I think from that perspective, there is a way to translate it, but they've kept true to their sense as a brand and done it within extreme sport. So yes, you might not consider them in the same category, but you also know that that Red Bull would be the same people who do kite surfing or skydiving and those kind of more dangerous extreme sports. So you then have an association that way, and they've made billions from doing that. So I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's all about positioning, storytelling, and reinforcement. If you've got that much money for budgets and you're able to be tapping into kind of heritage brands and really high brand awareness, then yeah, I think you do need to be a bit more creative within yourself to kind of look at, okay, you've dominated one space, what other spaces can we start to look at? But going from hotels to sneakers might be a bit too much of a jump.
Yeah, no, that's true. Shaded the Studio, what's the brand that you really look forward to all the time when their marketing comes out? Or historically, you're always like in fascination of them? I can tell you for me, that's Tesla is a good one. I know they're going through a lot of things at the moment. Apple is another one. Ted, my previous kind of employer. I always tend to think that if I throw them all in a mixer and they would need to start a campaign, like what would the three all like mix up together? What is that for you?
Controversial opinion, it's none of the bigger companies.
That's perfectly
So
fine. Yeah.
I've got a good friend who's the CEO and founder of a brand called Calling Beauty. And every time she pops up on my feed or my TikTok, she has really tailored, beautiful mood boards, and she talks through things like Sex and the City, mood, like who would be this character and what lip gloss would be that character. And everything she does is really creative. And every time I see her pop up, I really get excited because it's something slightly different, and everything she does is very true to the brand that she's building.
Yeah.
I get more excited for underdog brands. That's where I feel I'm most comfortable in. So brands, even to some extent, Inky is one that I really like, see and feel quite proud that I've worked with. But when I see a brand that I've worked with, all the ones that I've mentioned today, Shaded in some capacity has supported, I get more excited about the smaller brands challenging the big brands and the big brands coming out with really, billion-dollar projects that they were able to get the best in the business over.
That's amazing. And why is that? Isn't the case that, I guess it's not all the time, but isn't the case that the bigger the brand, the more the money they have, and the more the kind of mass influence they can impart, like everywhere you go it's just them, so you're more likely to and perhaps I'm just answering my own question, that me being fascinated by Ted or Teslas or Apple, they're everywhere more or less, and especially in Western Europe, you can think of these brands are just everywhere. Especially with TED Talks, they are, more or less every country on the planet, they have it. Does that kind of helps them ease into all of that, that they drive all of this power and they can easily change the narrative? But for someone like yourself, maybe you are in the industry, but you're in the weeds of like knowing the brands from down, absolutely from the scratch up, so you can appreciate the nuances there. But for a common sort of person who's not really, or for the brands who are smaller, they don't have that kind of an influence. They might not even know the strategies that they're deploying there.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult for brands and budget in every capacity, whether they're a billion-dollar brand like Jimmy Choo, a brand that I worked with. They've got their own kind of challenges and strengths versus a brand that's just starting with a bootstrap lean team. I think that there's a trend in the consumer space from what I've been seeing that is kind of anti-corporation to some extent. I think
Yeah, I think so.
so
Yeah.
many of the kind of big brands, the L'Oreals of the world, the Coties, all have some incredible brands. You mentioned brands that I look forward to seeing. Anything that Fenty Beauty does or Rare Beauty, they're, I think, pioneers in the diversity and inclusion space, but also generally create really strong and desirable products within the brand. Yes, they're led by celebrities, but they've become so much more than that. I think that people are more receptive to brands with purpose if they are even within like an LVMH or big group. So that's the Fenty Beauties, the Rare Beauties of the world. But so many of the bigger brands are lacking that outward purpose and being able to communicate that purpose, even if they do have one. So that's why I think that that trend we're seeing where people are moving more towards kind of SMEs and challenger brands versus going to the big corporations. I think that's why where I think just going back to the point of founder stories and team stories and feeling really involved in the community and the kind of feeling like they're a part of something versus just feeling like you're buying the same thing that everyone else buys and it becomes a routine that you're not really thinking about.
Duolingo, you mentioned that it's such a sort of culture phenomena, what happened with them, and from a brand, and I think they even posted a journey. I think maybe an influencer posted a journey where it was just a language app as you have on your phone that you might have open sometimes, but they became a phenomena. And I think it started with like, I think Dua Lipa and all of that. If you were to sort of do a kind of a breakdown analysis of like some reasons for their success, what would you put out? What stands out for you for them?
Yeah, I think they were one of the pioneers of creating a really digital first, social first strategy that was really tapped into their audience. So I think one of the things that a lot of brands don't do as well is take risks. Particularly the smaller brands that have more to lose, I think they might be a bit more open to being a bit risky. But I think Duolingo and brands like that, you see Ryanair, you see some of the ones that are doing really well on TikTok, they've taken what brand guidelines would traditionally be and thrown them out the window. Because I think if you
Yeah.
go to a traditionalist brand strategist and say, I'm going to kill the bird, they'll probably not tell you that that's a bad idea. And I think they did it anyway. So I think that from a breakdown perspective, I mean, typically we'd take hours on our brand breakdowns and really understand the nuance. But if I was to say in one sentence, what I think they've done really well is tapping into trends in a way that feels authentic to themselves and their audience.
And how does it work within the organizations? Because you have worked with the teams, I'm assuming, like, imagine I'm conjuring up a sort of a reenactment that someone might have come up with that idea, like, let's kill the bird. And I mean, the founders are there, the marketing team. It is a fairly large company, I assume. Um, who are the people who kind of push the ideas these through that? And of course, there are always legal counsels, and with these companies that, oh, of course, you cannot do that, and all of that. How does someone like yourself persuade these companies to take that leap of the faith? I mean, at times it is data, yes, you have to present, but this feels more emotional.
Yeah, I think sometimes it isn't to do with data at all, which sounds very counterintuitive to someone who's all about numbers. I haven't worked with the Duolingo team, but I know many teams like them where they're really not afraid to be a bit more risky. So one of the brands that comes to mind is a brand that we do work with called Luna Daily, and they do a lot of sensitive skincare. So one of their a lot of the work that they do is around vagina washes, and their kind of head, knees,
Yeah.
vulvas, and toes is their
They can
strap
go
line.
crazy with that topic.
Yeah, so I think that they're able to do a lot more kind of fun and cheeky and playful tone of voice than someone who is very much based in these are your colours, these are your fonts, these are your guidelines. They're able to be a lot more playful, and I think people react to that in a lot more of a kind of scroll stopping way, because in itself the brand and the ideation is very scroll stopping. So from my perspective, I think that when you work in like a traditionalist company, so KMI Brands, where me and Cassie first met, that was a retail first brand where they were taught to be quite brand safe. There is a lot more conversation around what is the brand safe version of what you want to do. So whether it's a trend, whether it's a kind of campaign or activation, there's a lot more limitations that you naturally have to do when there's, I blame it on the fact that a lot of the bigger companies have more to lose.
Yeah.
So they
they're a
do
bit
have
more
the legal
conservative,
teams,
yeah.
they do have people telling them off, whereas the smaller brands typically don't have
We're
that.
just 3 people. We
Yeah,
can do
you know, you can do whatever you want as long as it generates revenue. So we're working with a brand with the world's first lickable perfume, Amaretto.
Lickable perfume.
Lickable perfume. So I'll leave it to the imagination on what that could be used for. But but we're able to do a lot more with that kind of messaging than we would do for a brand that might even have that same kind of USBs but won't be happy with us kind of exploring things like the orgasm gap or things that will be tapping into, you know, the LGBTQ plus community and all of those things. We can then kind of look towards and look at, you know, ideally sponsoring an episode of Drag Race would be great. Like all of those things what we can present back to the founder, because she's already open to the idea of being really kind of flexible and wanting that virality and wanting that brand awareness within the markets that she thinks would be adjacent to it. I think it really helps us because we can be really creative. There's still creativity in brand safe guidelines, but you just have to work a bit harder.
Yeah. Shiv, I'm going to take you actually out of your world for a second, and I'm going to put you in a kind of a global geopolitics world. The reason I'm asking you is that to me, the politics kind of things, the institutions, they are brands themselves. Again, they're historical, they're legacy brands. I mean, Oxford University is a brand. It's been around for more than Ottoman Empire has been around. So they do carry a lot of sort of weight to them. How does the modern, the skills that you've acquired in the last decade, how transferable, this is not sounding like a job interview, but how transferable they are, the learnings from the kind of D2C world into the kind of like these legacy brand, let's say. They're not even like 30-40-year-old brands, like for example, we wanted to film some we were hoping to film some bits in the parliament, the British Parliament, but the moment I read through the legality of what can be and what cannot be filmed, immediately I was just like, there's just no point even in talking to these guys. I mean, it was not like super expensive, but cannot do this, cannot do that, and I feel like someone designed it that way, that I don't think so day one it was there. It was all like, literally just put all the rules in there. But over 800,000, whatever years it be, it has developed all sorts of these rules. But they are living in a time, as you're saying, the brands are becoming a bit more open. What do you think about these kind of legacy brands that more or less the countries are the members of that brand? 80 million UK citizens are part of the British Parliament brand. How can they be more inclusive and open? And I mean, I don't assume they're going to come up with a lickable perfume thing, but well, what do you think that they can do to be a bit more open to the world, especially the time we're living in?
Yeah, I think I'm on the board of 2 charities. So I'm an advisor for one and I'm on the board of another. One that so I'm happy to go into kind of my stance. One of the charities, 100 Allies, helps more women and people of colour and people from underrepresented backgrounds get into board positions, particularly within the beauty industry, which is where a lot of the work that I've done has been in. And another one called the Access Project, who are a phenomenal charity up and down the country that get
I remember introducing.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
They help working class and underrepresented backgrounds get into Russell Group universities, just like the university that I went to. I'm a child of a single parent mother and free school meals, so I do, my dad's around. I do love him and everything, but my household was kind of low income, and I'm very much around, I think you can't change without opportunity, and I think that if more people were kind of navigating those campaigns at any level, whether it's everyone from Parliament. I wanted to be a politician at one point in my life. My first
I think we all wanted to
internship.
be. It's one of
Yeah.
those things, yeah.
My first internship was at Parliament. I shadowed a PM. No, not the PM, an MP. And
Just a twist of
slight
words.
difference. And yeah, and I think that it's really difficult to talk about brands and even diversity, inclusion, all of those without the wider context. It's becoming underfunded. It's becoming we're somewhat regressing in terms of opportunities that I've been seeing recently. But I do think that the world, regardless of what country they live in, I think we owe it to ourselves to get the best out of people. And when they're the best that they can be, then the country will be the best that they can be too. So I think that in terms of kind of brand building, I think that if everyone was given more opportunity to be able to thrive in positions without that exclusivity attached to them, I think that that would really help. And that's something that we see in brands all the time as well, so that we see kind of old school ways of thinking that haven't necessarily been able to catch up to the 21st century, and we're able to come in and kind of break those down. But ultimately, we're only able to
share a story. I would love to hear. Yeah, what would be that brand? That's what they do.
Yeah, I think we're only able to break down legacy brands into kind of the modern age with people who are happy to kind of create that and be open to the strategies that are kind of a lot more modern in ways. So I won't say names, but a lot of brands that kind of come from tele shopping and QVC and kind of the more traditional channels of TV, a lot of them have struggled within the D2C, direct-to-consumer, online shopping landscape, because they're still using long-form content, glossy imagery. They're using kind of models that might not be representative, or they're doing things that aren't necessarily aligned with the cultural nuance that is now today in online culture. And I think one of the ways that we do that, I mean, we worked with a brand called Gatineau, which was a 120-year-old brand that had been recently acquired from a big beauty company. And when we came in, their average age of their consumer was 65 plus. We helped bring that down significantly at my time managing director at a performance marketing agency. And the way that we did that is through more innovative approaches on digital marketing, better ads, better ad campaign structures, but fundamentally like a real clear hero product, 2 to 3 hero products, and all the messages that could bring. So I think that we can only change things that want to change. And if they're open to change, there's ways to really kind of do exceptionally well with legacy brands that have, you see it all the time with brands that, you know, the Burberrys of the world, or the legacy fashion brands that have Coco Chanel, Tommy Hilfiger. All of these brands have been able to reinvent themselves constantly because they've kept up with kind of modernist consumer marketing strategies.
Yeah, I wanted to bring another brand. I think Guinness, if I'm not wrong. Is it Guinness or Heineken? It's an American brand, with a beer brand, which had quite a lot of controversy. I think they put an ad with a trans person, I think, and then there was a huge backlash because I think it might be, and it was an American brand. I forgot about it, and I was just thinking, as you were saying about legacy brand, that brand, I think they wanted to be really seen as a progressive, like 21st century brand, but I think they went, I wouldn't say too far, but I mean, whatever you make think of it. But they put that ad up, and suddenly people were smashing the beer and be like, you know, we don't drink this and all of that. And that is an example of maybe a brand trying to be up with the times, but it completely does a backlash.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, I would look to who created the campaign and if there was trans representation within that structure, because often you'll see ads creative, especially at the bigger agencies, the big TV productions. They typically have quite, you know, they'll have teams that might not necessarily represent their target market, for lack of a better word. So I think from our perspective, if you're not the target market, our team has everyone involved,
Yeah.
and it's very open, and it has everyone that's willing to work with us and do a good job. And I think having that nuance and diversity of thought, let alone the diversity of people, is really important. I think having people to double check and look over and kind of see whether that's culturally fitting to the moment as well, because what you don't want to do is alienate people. So
Yeah.
that ad is a great example of actually the communities that it's trying to serve being more alienated and feeling worse after the ad. So I think a great example is the famous Kendall Jenner Pepsi Cola advert,
Yes.
where you can stop racism with a cup of Pepsi. And I think it's potentially because those people of color or women or diverse, the people that are actually they're trying to present might not have been as forthcoming with their views because of any reason. It could have been hierarchy. I wasn't in the room to know. And so, and the words
Yeah.
of Alexander Hamilton, it's the roof that happens.
Yeah. It's a
But
room where it
yeah,
happens.
room where that happens. I wasn't there, but I do think that brands have a significant advantage when they pull in the communities that they're trying to serve within the campaigns and actually have them sign off and say that this is what we think is a good ad.
Yeah.
And I can see why they do it, but I think some of the ads that aren't necessarily landing are the ones that feel forced and feel like they're just trying to keep up with trends, and they're having diversity in for diversity's sake. And we see that all the time. So you typically see a shoot where there's one black person, one Asian person, one white person
Cocktail of
all
everyone.
together.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's needed. The smaller brands might not be able to afford many more models, and there's
Yeah.
absolutely reasons for that. But I think where it gets a bit touchy is when it's a bigger brand and they really do lack that diversity because they've hired 10 models and only 1 or 2 of them represent the wider group that they're trying to serve. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that answered your
No,
question.
it did. Shiva, I want you to be, just like myself, a fan at the moment, and I need you to tell me, what is your favorite ad of all time? If you want, I can go first and I can tell you
Yeah,
mine, actually.
tell me yours.
Mine is the MasterCard one.
Really?
And I haven't said which one is it, but you would know which one I'm talking about. It's the most famous MasterCard ever. No? It's the one, it's the... I thought it would be super famous, everyone would know, but it's the one where, they say that for some things money cannot buy, but for everything else, there's a MasterCard.
Yeah, no, I know the advert.
And that copy, I don't feel like, that just stays with me for life. It is one of my favorite. And it's so true though, right?
Yeah.
There's some things money can't buy, yeah.
Yeah, I think that advert's great. I think that, you know what? Our day-to-day isn't big advertising, it's micro moments. So everything that we tend to focus on is the micro moments of a brand. So that's their website, their paid advertising, their organic social, their all of those things. So my world is very much smaller micro moments and smaller
But personally
ads.
speaking, what's your favorite?
I really like, I mean, this is going to be a cop-out, but I look forward to the John Lewis ads every single year.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Every single year.
Oh, wow.
I love, like, there's a part of me that really enjoys, like, just Christmas time and snuggling up and watching a John Lewis ad on the TV.
I think last year was a case. The year before was better. This one, I'm not sure.
I just judge those type of ads on how much they can make me cry when I've watched the first time. So
that's
I do
true.
like a bit of release.
They do installations as well, like, and I think that's so cool. And so you go to for listeners abroad, like in London, we have this street called Bond Street, and just off of that street, there's a very big John Lewis store. And the day I think the ad pops up on Oxford Street, that's where the pop-up happens on the John Lewis as well. I think the 2 years ago when I saw them, I think they had like frogs everywhere, which was quite unique. But I love the activations that during Christmas, Bond Street, especially with Fendi and all these big brands, the store looks like an entrance to kind of Willy Wonka factory, and you want to feel like going in there. And then you go in there and you see the prices and you just want to run outside because it's just so expensive. But that is, to me, and a part of me is like a kind of fanboy to all of this. Like, I just love when people put an effort into all of these things. versus someone who doesn't. And you're very right. I think it is based on like the teams that if they decide to, they want to, they can do anything. From the Heinz ketchup, pass me the ketchup, to John Lewis ads and all of that. Um, Tell me an example of the brand that you have worked with is really, really successful. But at the same time, they're so seclusive, and they made you sort of kind of really think out of the box, that they give you a very tight one sheet. This is the brand font. This is that. And then you were like, oh, this is going to fail. But then when you did it, it was like, my God, this was great.
You know, I'm like a radical optimist, so I never think anything I'm doing is going to fail, even if it does. And I've failed so many times I can't count. I've Cassie, my co-founder, is the one that would actually translate the brand guidelines into a piece of content. I think it's really difficult for us when there's no content and people want us to create any storytelling from something where there's nothing to start with. I think that's quite difficult. So typically with brands like that, we'd basically say, look, we think you should do a shoot, and we could do anything from a few grand to a big shoot. And really just get some raw assets in. We typically create over 200 micro moments of videos that we can repurpose. They can then use those raw assets on organic social, and we can then repurpose for ads or websites or whatever we're kind of focusing on that day. So from my perspective, I think I've never gone into a brand and thought this is going to fail. What I have thought is I've worked with a few brands that I think don't necessarily have the budget to do what they want to achieve. So they often will get a brand come to us and say that they want to double the revenue and half the budget. And most logical mathematicians know that doesn't add up. So that's, I think, where the biggest problem lies for us, is actually just the realism. So we have something called a growth tracker, and we have like a spreadsheet that we give to brands just to get them a bit more realistically thinking about what they've achieved so far and what they should be looking for in the future from a cost per acquisition, average order value, and lifetime value. So basically, how much are you making on day one? What's that basket value? So how much is all of that transaction worth? And then how much are they coming back within 6, 12, 18 months? So we'll give them that, and give them that realistic kind of shakedown of being like, what you want is unachievable, but let's work towards something that is. So that's to me how I deal with issues like that. And then often brands will come back and either say, look, we don't have the budget to work with you like this, but can you still do that? So whether it's kind of online consultation for training in-house teams versus doing, or whether it's kind of full end-to-end production and us taking over the entire production line for their content, we're able to do that because we have that upfront conversation. And when we're doing that Brandstorm that I mentioned earlier, that Brandstorm audit really details what we can and can't do with the brand from what they already have.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Shiva, I want to come to something personal.
Mm-hmm.
So now I remember ages ago, I think it might be around 4, but you were the first Oxford Talks orator.
I was.
Because, and it's always very special to me. I think we never got a chance because every time we meet, there's something going on. And what made you say yes? Because it really started the journey that you are here today.
Yeah, I was 26 at the time, I think. And I'd done a lot in my career up until that point. I'd been managing quite senior people, a lot older than me. I'd done mostly brand side. And, you know, when you're brand side, it's only really the founders that get their story told.
Yes.
And when you approached me, I was just really flattered because I didn't think of myself as what you called me, which is a young leader. And to this day, I kind of look back and say, wow, I wouldn't have ever thought someone would have called me that. Despite probably that's what I was. And at the time, I think I was quite uncomfortable with that. But now I've grown up and I'm almost 30, I can appreciate.
Just a number. I'm 29.
Yeah, exactly.
Just numbers.
I can appreciate that was a bit of just imposter syndrome and a bit of kind of not feeling where I needed to be. So I think you helped navigate that, and we helped kind of work on my story, work on how it's communicated in an authentic point of view, authentic tone. You let me keep in the things that really was important to me, and highlight some of the things that I wanted to kind of talk at the time. But I always think back now and say I wish I could have done that now, because there's so much I want to say.
Yeah.
But you must get that all the time from all of the narrators.
Yes, they do. They are very much so. They want us to go to Harvard. If they're listening, please let us in. They want us to, so because Oxford is something they've done, and they're like, oh, what is the next location? And I'm like, yes, Harvard might be something we're looking into. So there's a huge waiting line behind that. Like the moment you say yes, so I'm like, I think a barrage is gonna open up that people are gonna be there. But for us, for me specifically, it was a very special moment in time in life, actually, because I thought, like, we just had come out of Oxford to the TEDx I was doing back then, and I think we were kind of being strangled by like what. And again, as any big companies, they have a sheet of like what you can do, what you cannot do. And at that point in time, there was the NFTs were coming out and the VR and all of that, and we wanted to do all of it, but there was just no kind of like leeway around doing that. I was like, okay, let's start our own thing. And I just couldn't believe someone would say yes to that. And I was like, I mean, what should we even call it? Like Oxford Talks, maybe. I was living in Oxford at that point in time. And then you said yes. I kid you not. So as of today, you were the first ever orator. We have done, I think, 200 plus videos as of today. Some of them behind a paywall, most of them outside in the world, people can watch it. But to that livelihood of almost 10 people is attached. And you are the first person to say, oh yeah, let's start this movement. And for me, that's why I always want to bring you back in.
Well, I'm always here. I'll always talk to you, Walid. And I think that one of the best things in my career has been saying yes to things that have scared me, and doing, speaking at Oxford University, like especially at the age that I did.
Oxford Union as well.
Yeah, Oxford Union. Where I know for a fact that some of the most greatest minds have spoken previous. I think that's really intimidating, but what's the alternative? I say no, and I always wish I had done it. So
yes, that's the feeling you'll get, people. So sign up.
I think that it really helps solidify my career, actually. And you're not paying me to say this. There's no kind of anything around this other than the fact that I truly do appreciate it, because it got me to a point where I was no longer just this person from this brand, or this person doing digital marketing or performance marketing or whatever it was. It was actually me as a person and creating a personal brand. So for me, it's really helped me. Now, when we had the Oxford Talks, I was so nervous, and your team was so helpful. And yes. I was stressed because there was 3 cameras just like there is today. And I really just froze. I couldn't speak for the first 5 minutes. It was fine. I got there. The talk is fine. I'm a perfectionist, so there's always parts that I'll change. But I think now you look at me 5 years on almost, and I can sit in front of 10 cameras and I can speak in front of 200 people, and I don't care as much as I did. And I think that if I hadn't have done that experience, I don't think it would have prepared me in the same way to what I'm doing now, which is hosting a 200 plus people conference.
Yeah. And I think that to us, and also I got this question asked yesterday 3 times over, actually. And I felt like I hope there was a way to capture all of that this legacy, this work we've done, that and you only get to see it. It's like the kind of Steve Jobs quote, like connect the dots looking backwards. Now, when you said yes, even at that point in time, for me, it was like a kind of a suspended thing that, okay, Shiv is here and we need to help her with this, that. But looking back at it and the way you have sort of, and again, as you said, there's no commercial elements in me saying these things at all. But you said that on your own account, on your own social media, that this was what it was. For the fact that there was a point in life where you struggled to speak in front of people.
Yeah, 100%.
To now to 200 people. And for me, that was the biggest success story. Like, whoa, wow, like, oh, we were at the center point of, Shiv being transitioning? Okay, you know what? I'm actually gonna do this.
Because I think I was bullied for my voice. I think I didn't mention this on the talk, but I could have mentioned it. I think my voice is very high pitched. When I get excited, it goes higher. So I always thought that I was told in school, stop, put your hand down. I was that annoying kid with her hand up all the time because I was a know-it-all, and I still probably am. But I think that I was never really thinking to myself that I would want to be front and center. I went through a stint of acting and then I got bullied out of it. I did I can't sing. I wanted to be a singer, but I realized I'm tone deaf and that's probably a bit of a problem. But I think that, yeah, I think that to that point when we met, I was, scared to speak up to the level that I do today. And I get in conversations with CEOs from companies that are in their billions and able to speak to them with confidence. And as the CEO and co-founder myself, I'm doing that now every single day. So I feel like if I had maybe not just Oxford Talks, maybe also the work that I'd been done before that, but I definitely think Oxford Talks helped me give a level.
Silent transition.
Yeah, I think it gave me a level of, okay, it's okay to have a personal brand, and maybe some people might actually watch your talks.
Which a lot of people have, yes. I refer to it, and I think this is something is. I feel like it's going to be that Simon Sinek moment, and that's why I really wanted to have you on the podcast. That I think when we did, I think you were working at a different company, and there's so much happened to life in between that time, where you're now a CEO of your own company, which is amazing, and you're expanding, and all of those things are happening. And I really wanted to sort of bring that feeling in that, yeah, I couldn't have predicted that at all 5 years ago. So that's really remarkable what you have done. We do have a tradition on the podcast. So on the lighter note, we ask people to tell us about that one profound book that changed their life. It doesn't need to be one thing. It can't be a series of books, because Nadia here knows that we what we're doing is we're giving that book out to people, and they're gonna hopefully read it and hoping them to connect with you afterwards. Someone suggested like a magazine before, like 3-5 series of, and I was like, there goes our budget, because we are sending out magazines to people. But what would be that one book for you that really changed you big time as a person?
I would love to say it was a fiction, but it was a non-fiction. I mostly read non-fiction. I mostly read self-help books or books about yeah. So I think really early in my career, I was given a book called The Choice Factory by Richard Shotton.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really short book. It could be read on the tube. Like, it's very short. And it gave 25 behavioural biases that consumers face every single day. So it's all of the psychological nuance to purchasing behaviour. And at the time, it was all these invisible things that shops do and websites do and restaurants do to try and make you purchase more. So an example is taking off the pound sign on a really bougie restaurant, because you're more likely to spend more when you don't see a currency. Or
yeah. Oh wow. Well, removing currencies from our website.
Or another one where if you have the sweets and the low price point near a checkout in a supermarket, you see it's because it's where children will grab it, because they're closest to the ground. So it's just a case of, that book really opened my eyes. There's more intensive books like Decoded, and there's a lot more on consumer psychology that I've digged into since. But I think that really opened my life to how manipulative the world of consumer marketing actually is, and how to tap into those. We now use it at Shaded every single day. We're looking at whether the content we're creating is suiting us in terms of social bias or price aversion or any of the kind of mentions within that book. So that would be mine. It's quite a geeky read, but it's also really, really easy. It's like, honestly, it's pathetically short in terms of a book, which means that some people might actually be able to read it in a busy world.
I was going to say, no, definitely. And I think sometimes it does, sometimes you want to read something short, and it might interest you to read something longer on the format, rather than, like, for example, there's a book next to you with Michael Beirut. Like, it is a big chunk. You need, like, it's not good for bedtime reading, actually. um Shiv, thank you so much for being on the pod. It was an absolute pleasure. We do a customary handshake, so